Okay, apologies for the late start. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. This should be a fun one. Big Ten program rankings, all time. All time, everyone. All time. We went through this exercise with the SEC last night, and a number of people failed to grasp all time. Everything counts the same. Yeah, I'm going to show you some things that relate to the last 50 years, the last 20 years, the last 10 years for a conversation piece, for context, to show who has succeeded in the conference the last 10 years, the last 20 years, the last 50 years, because those are relevant, meaningful slices of time for various reasons. And for anyone who does not think that that's so, then either jump on the show and talk to me, discuss, debate, we'll talk it through, or be mad or leave or whatever. So we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. It, on one hand, it never ceases to amaze me how many people cannot grasp certain things, but then I also realize that I watch things. I'm sure I do. I don't intentionally do this, but I'm sure I watch things, typically not sports related because I don't watch sports analysis, but non-sports related stuff that I probably get triggered by a title, get triggered by one statement, get triggered by, and don't listen to the entire video. It's obvious here, and I'm not alone. It's everybody on the YouTube universe, at least that tries to be honest and be forthright and do a good job and has half a brain, that get misinterpreted all the time. So that happens every day here, dozens of times. Most of the comments coming in recently, for some reason, are from people that obviously didn't listen, didn't watch, or are completely just overboard. So not to start out the live stream on that note, but I did. So here we go with the Big Ten all-time rankings. And again, it's amazing because there is no opinion involved here. These are just lists of statistics that have been compiled. There's only one factor in this that involves any type of subjective input, and that's the point system. The point system is the only subjective portion of this. We have done every conference, and this is the last one that we're reviewing live with you. And the reason we're doing it live with you is I've already done a video. So there's already a Big Ten all-time rankings video out there. So we don't need to do another one. That's why as soon as I have finished with the last call, I'm done, I'm out, because I've explained all this. So check out the video, but I will go back through it again. I understand people are busy and they can't watch everything. But we've already presented all this. So I'm here to respond to your comments and questions in the chat and to respond to any phone calls. So we've left the link in the chat. So if you see the video or you've got a point of contention or praise or analysis or criticism or whatever it might be, please give me a call and we will discuss Big Ten all-time rankings. And just like every other conference, are there flaws in this? Yes, there are flaws. Even before we apply my system, which is not perfect, there are inherent flaws in any type of rankings. First of all, because you've got schools that have entered the conference at different times. You have schools that have entered the conference at different times, and much of their history has been forged on results in other conferences. So I am taking all-time statistics. So Penn State's played in the Big Ten for 31 seasons. Before that, they were an independent. I am not discarding their zillions of years as an independent. We are going to see their numbers all time. Much of that was played in the Big Ten. So we could do a series in which we just take Big Ten rankings played amongst Big Ten teams when they were Big Ten members. That would take a lot more time and would be a lot more exhaustive. This was exhaustive and comprehensive enough. So let's bring in Drew here to start the show, even though I have yet to present anything. So hopefully Drew has seen the numbers. Drew, how you doing today?
Um, I'm doing fine. I haven't seen the numbers because I haven't watched any of your videos lately. So,
Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we put you to the side here? I'm going to go through the numbers, and then you
okay.
can take them in from there, and we can discuss. Thanks for calling. All right, so let's do that. So we've got a few different ways to present the numbers. And for those of you who have been here for the other live streams, you've seen that, okay, I'm going to throw up a spreadsheet that is going to wow everyone with all sorts of columns and rows and numbers all over the place. And of course, we will explain. And I don't expect you to take all of this in. That's why I'm going to walk you through it. But once we get through this, then we're just going to let the previous video roll. That's going to show all the numbers that in a more palatable form that you're going to see the listings and you're going to see the top to bottom that is more digestible. All right, we got winning percentage. Why don't we do this to start us out, because Michigan's going to be here in second place or first place, depending on the category, much more than Illinois. So let's go all the way to that left category, and you see winning percentage all time. And one thing I need to do before we get started, I need to go back on Penn State, because another liberty I'm taking in this that's justifiable, or I would not take it, is, of course, I'm going by the raw numbers and what the numbers tell us. We are not going to lie or manipulate the numbers in any way. However, in a situation like Penn State, I'm going to have to go back and check out their win total and their record all time, because of all the Jerry Sandusky stuff. No, I'm not vacating wins for a situation in which had nothing to do with football. So we talk football here, and we deal with those social situations. And of course, that was probably the most deplorable and despicable and corrupt act I can think of within the sports realm. So I'm not discounting that at all. It's horrible. It was a criminal act, but it had nothing to do with football. It did not impact football. If there is cheating involved that impacted football, then we will apply that. But these vacated wins that had nothing to do with football, those wins are going to be reinstituted by myself. So I cannot vouch for that on the Penn State. There's been so much going on and so many lists and numbers and categories to deal with, but I'm going to have to vet all through those numbers as well. So the Penn State winning percentage might be a little shy of what it should be. But right now, Ohio State and Michigan, also Alabama, are battling for the best winning percentage in the country. And you might as well just say it's a three-way tie because it's so close. I believe Michigan has the percentage lead with the Ohio State vacated wins. And I believe Ohio State's got the lead when you throw in the 12 vacated wins that, again, of course, had nothing to do with football. So go whichever way you want. It's a virtual tie. I think it's pretty idiotic for anyone to raise a banner and go crazy about a winning percentage lead of 0.011111. Either way, you can be happy and thankful and grateful and proud that your school is definitely right there in the running. Absolutely. But do I think that it's substantial that Alabama is 1 percentage point behind Ohio State and Michigan all time? No. If they were 30 points behind, I would think that that's substantial. Texas is 702 right now. I think that's substantially behind Ohio State and Michigan. And therefore, that is one category in which you can decidedly say Texas does not rank with Ohio State and Michigan, but Alabama's at 733. Does that matter? It's 734, 733? No, we're about reasonable analysis. So it reminds me of one time arguing baseball statistics, and I called somebody a 300 hitter. That's a rough term. If you like baseball, that guy's a 300 hitter. And somebody was going crazy because his career average was 299. Well, he's not a 300 hitter. He's a 300 hitter. Okay, so there you see the winning percentages there. And of course, Ohio State and Michigan are in the lead. After that, of course, we're going to see this trend over and over and over and over. Penn State and Nebraska, they have histories in which they were way behind the Blue Bloods up until the 1960s. And then, especially Nebraska, but also Penn State were as good as anybody in the latter portion of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Those might have been the two best programs in college football. Over that time frame, arguably they were close. Alabama certainly was there. Notre Dame was there. Oklahoma was there. And then, of course, Penn State continued that dominance into the 90s. Penn State was really good in the 90s. So they have really shot up the charts, I'm sure. If we would have done this 25 years ago, they wouldn't be anywhere close to that. Well, that's probably a bad time frame. If we would have done this like in 1990 or 1980. So it's been remarkable what Penn State and Nebraska have done since the 60s. And of course, Nebraska's had it down 10 years. So that has brought their winning percentage down now on the flip side. And we can go through all of this. Some folks have questioned, why are you putting in the Pac-12 schools? Well, of course, the Pac-12 schools did not accumulate these stats against Big Ten teams, mostly. Of course, USC's got this sterling, ridiculous Rose Bowl record in which they have largely beaten down the likes of Ohio State, Michigan, and others from the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. So that's impressive. And that's largely been under three coaches. It's largely been John McKay, John Robinson, and Pete Carroll. So what I'm doing here by inserting USC, UCLA, and Washington and Oregon into the mix is just showing what type of programs are coming into the Big Ten. What type of historic programs are coming into the Big Ten. Indiana's got the worst winning percentage in the country of a power program. They're the worst. They are the worst in the country. Dead last. Indiana, 418. All right, this next figure over here, those are AP poll points. So what happens there is at the end of any particular season, when a team finishes, let's say, number one in the country, they get 25 points. Number two gets 24 points. Number three gets 23 points, and on down the line. The number 25 team in the country gets 1 point. Is that a perfect system? No, much like my system, it's not perfect. However, over the course of a long period of time, it becomes more and more valid as long as the people doing it are somewhat reputable, and I believe they are. I don't believe they're super knowledgeable in some cases. And of course, I've taken my pot shots at the AP poll many times because many times it doesn't make sense and is not validated by the results. However, over 87 years, yeah, we can pretty much trust. If we went to the number 5 team in the country every year for 87 years and looked at the number 5 team in the country, sure, we could make an argument that they should have been number 6 or number 3 or number 7. But they're generally the number 5 team in the country. So those poll points are valid from that standpoint. I will make a case out of Minnesota, for example. So Minnesota fans, listen up. I'm going to stick up for you in this one. And there are obviously tons of cases like this. Minnesota in 2021 and 2022 went 9-4 both seasons. Were they ranked? No. Did not get ranked in the final poll at 9-4. So they get zero credit for that. Zero credit for that. So they got the same credit Minnesota did as 1-11 teams. So that's where the system is flawed. Number one, there's an argument that they should have been ranked. And number two, just because you finish number 26 in the country doesn't mean that you are really any less than number 25. There's about 10 or 12 teams each season that you could make an argument at the end of the season should be ranked or could be ranked. So I can understand that many of you are like, okay, this is just a bunch of point totals, and it makes it obvious. Ohio State's been the best in terms of ranked teams, and Michigan's been second best, and on down the line. Of course, USC's up there as well, but we're not focused on the Pac-12 teams coming in as much here. So that's obvious. But that's kind of a difficult concept to grasp, maybe. So we did this. So this is a listing of the teams and a listing of, to the far right, their rankings, how many times they were ranked. So what we've got here on the right side is the first number is final AP rankings. How many times was that school ranked in the final AP poll? The second number is how many times in the top 10. Third number, how many times in the top 5. Michigan is one ahead of Ohio State in final AP ranked teams, 64 to 63. Ohio State has a slim lead in top 10 teams and a substantial lead over everyone in top 5 teams, 30 top 5 teams. So more than a third of the time, Ohio State has a top 5 team in the country. More than a third of the time, 30 out of 87 times, Ohio State has finished in the top 5 in the country. Let's see who else has done well. Well, we can imagine Penn State and Nebraska, virtually tied across the board. Virtually tied across the board. Top 25s, top 10s, top 5s, Penn State, Nebraska. This is going to be a common theme. Now, after that, Iowa, of course, has been solid for the last 20 plus years under Kirk Ferentz. And before that, under Hayden Fry, had dismal teams in the 60s and 70s, pretty much in line with Wisconsin, although Wisconsin was about a decade behind before Barry Alvarez kicked it in at Wisconsin. So there you see, again, top 25, top 10, top 5 finishes out of all those schools in the Big Ten. Yes, Indiana has finished in the top 5 twice. In the top 25, 6 times. Rutgers. Yes, Rutgers sticks out like a sore thumb. They finished ranked 3 times. That's it. Never in the top 10, never in the top 5. 3 times ranked. They have finished ranked as many times in their history as Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and I guess that would be the 3 have in the last 3 years. So the Rutgers football history actually has been awful. Just let that sink in. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State have finished ranked as many times in the last 3 years as Rutgers in their history, the team that won the very first college football game. And of course, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State have finished in the top 5 and the top 10 multiple times in the last 3 years, and Rutgers 0 in its history. Okay, this next, to kind of underline what's been going on recently, that's the college football playoff era. And that is a no contest. Michigan's got a national championship. They are the reigning champions. They are the reigning champions of the Big Ten 3 consecutive years. But overall, Ohio State has been the best team in the conference, obviously, for the last 10 years. I don't think anyone would debate that. Michigan's number 2 now after this surge of 40-3? Is that the record the last 3 years? 40-3? Yes, I believe it is. So take that into account. They were 54-29 before that, and they surged. Iowa's been strong. Wisconsin's been strong. I'm impressed by the Wisconsin number because for about 3 to 4 years now, they've been pretty marginal, but they're still sitting at 90-38. So really strong Wisconsin teams in 2014 through 19 under Paul Chryst. Penn State, of course, right there as well. Now, this next figure, you see the next column over, that's in this century, which starts in 2001, technically. So that's this century. And Ohio State's got about a 50-game lead over Michigan and about 45 games over Wisconsin. Wisconsin's got the second best record in the conference during this time. And of course, we know what Iowa and other schools have done. We would have to say that Penn State's been the third best school during that time. They are about 7 or 8 games behind Michigan. And then we go back to 1970 and we see that Ohio State's got about a 35-game lead over Michigan. And Penn State's been really good. They are just about 10 games behind Michigan, as is Nebraska's pretty much right there with Michigan, battling for number 2. So the best program since 1970, Ohio State. Although if we were going to measure the best program, 1970 to the turn of the century, if we would do the last 30 years of the 20th century, that's Nebraska. Nebraska is the best program, 1970 to 99 or 2000. But if you take it all from 1970 to date, that's pretty obvious. And then there's a tier, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska. We could argue them all day. And on down the line from there. Check out the video. All right. And take into account that everything I just showed you about the records in the college football playoff era, the 21st century, and since 1970, none of those go into the point system. Those are just a point of reference, discussion point. None of those go into the. This is all about all-time rankings. All right, let's take it back down here. And again, I apologize for the spreadsheet and what you can and can't see and all that other business, but understand there's a video that lays this out much better. And once we get through this and start taking calls and responding to your comments, then you'll see it scroll behind me and it will be much more palatable. Maybe I'll put it up. No, I don't think you'd be able to see it if we put it on the monitor. Ohio State's got the most bowl wins. USC now coming into the league has the most bowl wins at 35. No. Sorry, Penn State fans. You're number 1 in bowl wins, 31. Joe Pa was crazy good in bowl games. Really good. Bobby Bowden and Joe Paterno. I think many of you can relate, about the same age range as me, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger, but Joe Paterno, Bobby Bowden won their bowl games 70% of the time, which is a remarkable number considering that they were playing big opponents in big games. So that's impressive. Ohio State's number 2 and Michigan's number 3, I believe. Is anybody else in there? And again, USC is going to come in with 35. And so they're going to take over a few of these conference leads all time. Major bowl wins. Again, USC comes in with the major bowl win lead, but out of the teams that have played in the Big Ten, we've got Ohio State with 21 and Penn State with 17. Next up, let's go to conference championships. Michigan has the most Big Ten championships all time. Now, Nebraska has won more conference championships by 1. Those were won, of course, in the Big 12 and the Big 8. So we are identifying here, to be clear, we are just taking all the current teams in the Big Ten and looking at their all-time accumulation of numbers all time, not just in the Big Ten. We're getting to that in just a second. So Nebraska would be number 1 technically, but out of teams just solely in the Big Ten, Michigan is number 1. And of course, there's a big drop off after Ohio State, as there typically is after the first 2. Or in some categories with Nebraska and Penn State, they're able to hang in there depending on the situation. Penn State gets ripped off more than anyone when it comes to conference championships because they didn't play in a conference and they had a damn good football program forever. So they get nicked the most by this category right there. Penn State probably takes the most unjustified hit for not playing in a conference. But again, we can't account for everything. The bulk of this conference started in 1896. We're not going to go through the particulars of everyone, but right around that time, because some entered in 1899, 3 years later. But you basically had the bulk of the conference all the members that we know, that first 9, Ohio State was the last one in the door in 1912. Let's see. Ohio State was the last one in the door in 1912. And then after that, Michigan State truly made it a Big Ten and changed the name of the conference in 1953. Then became the Big Ten. It was the Big Ten. And there you go, Michigan State 1953. Then, of course, Penn State in 93. And then we had Nebraska. And then a couple of years later, Maryland and Rutgers. And those schools have largely not been successful. Penn State has. Now, they've not won conference championships, though. Penn State, basically, James Franklin, for as much as Joe Paterno is an all-time legendary coach, his stay in the Big Ten, pretty close to what James Franklin has done. He always finished second, third, fourth in the Big Ten. Always was going to really good bowl games, but not competing for national championships. Once he entered the Big Ten, except for, of course, in 1994, his second season in the Big Ten, Penn State just really good. But 4 Big Ten championships in 31 years, okay, that's better than anybody else not named Ohio State or Michigan. But that's 3 from Paterno and 1 from James Franklin. So your conference percentage here, that's the number of times that these particular schools have won a Big Ten championship versus the years they've been in the conference. And Michigan's number 1. Ohio State's only a couple percentage points behind, and Michigan had 6 Big Ten championships before Ohio State ever entered the conference. And so that can be accounted for by some people. When you look at national championships, here's the deal with national championships. I am going by the Winsipedia and other claimed national championships, and I'm going with the basic Google search. That's going to be changed and corrected to a certain degree because, again, just like the vacated wins, we know that there's a better way. We know that there's a better system, and that would be the Voice of College Football system. It's to analyze each specific season and determine, was this a fair national championship? Well, during the college football playoff era, it certainly is. I'm not changing any of those national championships, but before that, there can be some national championships that are changed. I am rarely taking away national championships. Rarely. I cannot even think of, I'm sure they're there. We went back to 1970. We got to finish our run of reviewing national championship seasons to get it right. And to implement the Voice of College Football national championship system, because we want to do it the fair way. In 1994, who's the national champion? Nebraska. Who's the rightful national champion? Nebraska and Penn State. That's an example of a problem. The national champion shouldn't just be Nebraska in 1994. Penn State did everything Nebraska did. They did everything under their power in a power conference, playing maybe in a better conference, or at least as good a conference, schedule, all of it. There should be 2 national champions in 1994. That's just one example. I could point out 50 more. So we're going with the official numbers right now. And again, that could be changed. So, for example, we've got a video out there. Check it out. Alabama 18 national championships. Are they justified? Are they valid? Because Alabama gets reamed and criticized for this on a regular basis by probably largely people that don't know what they're talking about and don't know. They just figure, oh, I heard somewhere that they claimed a national championship in 1957, that they lost a game or tied a game, or they had 2 losses one year and claimed a national championship. Yep, absolutely. Did Alabama claim national championships that they should not be credited for? Yes. Yep. However, guess what? Alabama could also claim 2 other national championships. When I vetted out the entire history of Alabama football, I took away 2 national championships. But I gave them 2 national championships. It It worked out to 18. Alabama, your 18 national championships are valid. Just they're not the same 18. We've got the NFL draft, and that's Ohio State, and that's all understood. USC now coming into the Big Ten will now be number one in NFL draft selections out of the Big Ten teams with about a 40-player lead over the Buckeyes. But Ohio State, of course, for years and years and years has been dominating the NFL draft from the Big Ten perspective. And of course, Nebraska and Penn State are going to show up strong. Michigan State's got a nice number of NFL draft selections as well at 323. Now, when we look at first round selections, Ohio State's number one all time. And wow, Michigan's not close. USC is close. Now, that's the race right there, 91-86. And you see the other numbers there. All-Americans. Now, the last three categories we're going to, All-Americans, Heisman Trophy winners, and major award winners. If you have an issue with those, I totally understand. I actually have an issue with it to a certain extent. However, I will say, not just with this conference, with every conference, that once the numbers were broken down and we compiled the numbers, the lists of All-Americans and Heisman Trophy winners. Well, Heisman Trophy winners, there's only one, so that's a bit scattered. But All-Americans and major award winners almost goes perfectly in line with the wins and championships and accomplishments of the schools. So I got to credit the AP writers or whoever else is involved in these awards. And, you know, I got to say that, I had a vote for the All-America team this past year, and I didn't even fill it out. So hopefully they give me another chance next year. All right. So with All-Americans, we've got Ohio State 93, Michigan 88. And where's USC? 84. So it's a great race in All-Americans. And then we've got Heisman Trophy winners, and USC comes into the league at number one with 8, Ohio State 7. And then we've got, these are major award winners. So again, I totally understand the argument against this being relevant. It's an individual award that is not objective, it's subjective. Now, this one, Ohio State does break away with a decent lead here. But man, you go conference to conference, it almost just runs right in line with the wins and the championships. So Ohio State has 30. That might be the most in the country. So here we're talking about Bednarik Awards, Remington, Nagurski's, Lombardi's, Mackey's, Bolitnikov's, and on down the line. All of them. Thorpe, Groza, Guy, all of them. And so that's where we stand. I am going to roll the video behind me, and we're going to start taking some calls here. Nate's jumping on the line to talk some college football with us. What's going on, Nate?
Hey, long time no see, Mark. What's up?
Not too much. How you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Good.
I'm still humbled about my, well, I guess you would call it asterisk championship, but
why is that? Why is there an asterisk?
Well, I mean, I don't agree it's an asterisk championship. I just saying what everyone else is saying, but I don't agree with it though.
Oh, you're talking about this past year's Michigan championship, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll just give you my slice of it. Is that I consider it a full and valid national championship until I hear something that, and it is confirmed that there's something which would cause me to say that it's not.
Right. I mean, I think Michigan, won fair and square, like NCAA said earlier or after the game. But I mean, I know they cheated. I mean, I admit that they did cheat. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, so.
Yeah, and if that never went any further than Connor Stallions, I feel in some ways just as bad for Michigan players, Michigan fans, Michigan coaching staff, and anybody connected to the university as I do even their opponents, just because it's Michigan's responsibility. He was
Right.
hired and employed by them. However, if he acted on his own, I think many of us can relate to situations in which people act on their own. They're rogue employees and they do crazy, dumb things and corrupt things. And yes, the company should be held accountable for that, but at the same time, they can't know everything that's going on. Now,
Right.
I have thoughts that go way beyond that, but they can be reserved and have been stated in the past. But I'll leave it at that in regards to waiting for an NCAA investigation announcement.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about this upcoming season. Like, I think Michigan, is still gonna be good, but it's not be as good as great as last year, because last year was a different team. I mean, I would say a special team to watch, but I mean, but anyways, this year's I think Michigan. I think Davis Warren is probably gonna be the starter. Although I want to see Alex Orji to try to start maybe one game, but yes, he needs to work on his accuracy for his throwing, but he can run the ball. I mean, that's the only thing he's really good at, running the ball. But I mean, I think Orgy still has a lot of time before, you know, uh, um, the first game plays. So I mean, I don't know. Who
So
knows?
you're basing your Davis Warren selection on what? The spring game?
Yeah. I think I would pick him for the starting job, like for game one, and maybe give Orgy a shot the second game, kind of like what Ryan Day did with Kyle McCord and was it Devin Brown? Yeah, Devin Brown for the second game. Yeah, but I don't know what Sherrone Moore's plan is, but I think it might be kind of like that situation. But I don't know. Who knows?
I think, Nate, that Michigan's decision has as much to do with how they want to run their offense as
Right. Yeah.
who's the better quarterback.
Now, I personally think it's Davis Warren, but I mean, um, but the coaches know they know better than I do because I'm not a scout or a coach or near us or her coach or scout. Um, but yeah, I think they'll be okay. They'll be just. I think they'll be just fine, but maybe a little bit of losses. Uh, uh, I think they might lose 2 or 3, but those are the minimum losses for. I think the highest loss is probably like 3 losses, but I think they could go 10-2 if they could, but that's my prediction.
So you're pretty set on this season, it sounds. If you think they're going to go 10-2, and the most that they could lose would be 3, it's a pretty tight window.
Right? Yeah, like 9-3. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I think loss. Well, if they're going 10-2, probably the losses are probably Texas at home. Sorry, my Wolverine fans, but um, lost to Oregon. Now, I'm not trying to say Ohio State doesn't have a chance against Michigan. They do. I mean, I'm saying
They got a chance?
I'm saying that I need to see it first before if like Ryan Day.
You need to see it first against Michigan?
Yeah, I mean I know Ryan Day beat Michigan like 2019, right? But that was with Urban Meyer's roster. But
Yes. So I'm trying to follow your logic here, Nate. So for you
yeah,
to make a prediction on Ohio State and Michigan, you have to see Ohio State beat Michigan first.
Like, yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay, so you're picking Michigan. It's 100% certainty because there's no way that you understand they're not playing before they play.
No,
okay,
I'm not
just
saying
clarifying that.
Yeah. I'm not saying.
But you're giving Ohio State a chance.
Right? Yeah,
You've got a chance.
There's a chance that Ohio State. Yeah,
there's a chance.
Yeah, there's a chance. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Ohio State. I
wasn't giving them any chance.
But yeah. But so you think Ohio State's not going to win, or are you saying the Michigan's not going to win that one rivalry?
I was riding with you on that one, Nate.
Oh, okay.
Ohio State, no chance.
No chance. Okay. I mean, it'll be a what do you call it? What's the word?
A barn burner.
A barn burner, and plus Ohio State had, if let's say the last game in the season, Michigan and Ohio State, I guess both, well, not both. One's undefeated, one's 9-2, and with all that talent that Ohio State has from transfer portal, recruiting and stuff, if they lose to Michigan again, I think Ryan Day is not going to get fired, but I know he's on the hot seat. I think his hot seat is going to get really hotter.
Okay, according to who?
Well, to me, but I mean,
no. That's not what I mean, Nate. I'm not trying to be facetious, but that you understand when you talk about hot seats, there are hot seats that we proclaim here in the media, fan bases, and so forth. And then there's the hot seat that really matters among the people that make the determination. Do you think Ryan Day is truly going to be on a hot seat in Columbus at Ohio State if he loses to Michigan this year? Or are you talking about just Ohio State? He's already on the hot seat.
Right. Yeah.
Most Ohio State fans.
Just that, the second one you said, just at Ohio State, yeah.
Okay, well, I think he's already there.
Yeah. Although his record is pretty good, but I mean,
it's pretty good.
Yeah, if I were a Ohio State fan, I don't have faith in him. If I were a Ohio State fan, but
who has a better record, Ryan Day or Jim Harbaugh?
I guess Ryan Day.
Okay, just checking. Just because just making it is pretty good.
I mean, yeah, I get. I mean, hate to say it, yeah, but Ryan Day has a better record. But who knows? Michigan could go 8-4, 8-9, 3, 10-2. Who knows? We don't know yet because the games hasn't started yet. But it's been good talking to you again, Mark. Go Blue, and good luck to your Buckeyes this season.
I appreciate that, Nate. Thanks for calling. Don't be a stranger. All right, let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. And again, Ohio State's got a chance. Heard that from Nate. They got a chance. Buckeye fans, be happy, be excited. Nate says a chance. There's a chance. All right, let's keep it rolling here. Adam's checking in. What's going on, man?
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I just had a quick question for you regarding these rankings. So let's assume that you and I had 10 races in which we raced 50 yards, and you won 7 out of the 10 times. And then we had 10 races of 100 yards, and I won 7 out of the 10 times.
Yep.
Who would you say is the faster runner?
I would say the person that, it depends on the measurement of what you consider to be speed.
Right. So I guess my point is...
Because then we could both run, a mile or a quarter mile or a marathon, and then we could get different results there as well.
Right. So you're faster than me at 50, and I'm faster than you at 100. So I guess my point is, when you look at these rankings, you really have to take into account schedule strength disparity, number one. And I think you also have to take into account questionable national titles, like OSU in 2002. They don't win that national championship unless they get that pass interference call in overtime, which was arguably not a good call. And then before the BCS, what?
Are you serious?
I am serious that Miami should have won that game because that PI call was not.
Do me a favor, Adam. If you've got an hour to kill someday, you watch the cut down version of that game and you tell me how many times Ohio State got gypped by those officials.
Okay, we'll do. I will, and I'll change my mind if it.
And I will give you one specific example from that game. Ohio State's up by a field goal. There is about 2:45 on the clock. They've got a 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 6. They throw a pass to the sideline. Two things happen. Number one, Chris Gamble catches the ball in bounds. Number two, he's held by both hands by the defender, his jersey. And Keith Jackson and Dan Fouts both said, first of all, he's in bounds. Secondly, there's a pass interference call. No,
I remember that.
They did a punt.
I think you're correct.
So they keep the ball. They're going to keep the ball with 2.5 minutes left. And then who knows they may run out the clock. At worst, they're going to go 3 and out with better field position and have killed who knows how much time. That's just one example.
Right, and I think that example kind of proves the point that you and I might respectfully disagree about whether OSU deserved it. And before the BCS, there was consistent disagreement with the AP and the coaches poll about who should have won the national title that you've pointed out quite effectively. So my point in giving the example about the 50-yard dash and the 100-yard dash is that it depends on the metrics you use. And when you have schedule strength disparity like we've had over the last, say, 20 or 30 years, and you have disputed national championships, it's really difficult to rank them. And I think you're doing the best job possible to do that. But
I appreciate that.
I think it's very difficult to make a determination about who really is the best. Had circumstances been different, say, Ohio State was running those 100-yard dashes and not those 50-yard dashes. But I hope you see my point, and thanks again.
I thought you were going to take that analogy in a completely different way. I thought you were going to take it as I would believe a Michigan fan would take it, that Ohio State wins 100-yard dashes and Michigan is winning the marathon. Although I don't even know if Michigan's winning the marathon, but they probably have a better argument in winning the marathon that goes all the way back to, the 1890s.
Yeah, I thought about that, but then I thought, well, how can you say that, for example, if you're beating me 7 out of 10 times in a 50-yard dash and I'm beating you 7 out of 10 times in 100, how can you really say that I'm faster than you or vice versa? And I think that's the problem when you have these schedule strength disparities and these disputed national titles, such as, when USC and LSU in 2004, and certainly in the 80s, you had many of those. So I think it's really tough to make this distinction. But
Adam,
I think
make a great point. I'm sorry to interrupt, Adam.
No,
finish your point.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
So you make an outstanding point, and I think that there are so many things. I could make a list, 37 items long, and I bet you could, of what are conditions concerning these rankings that could be reviewed. And strength of schedule would be the first thing I would think of. Secondly, the Big Ten has been one of the more stable conferences, but especially when you go to the Big 12 and some of these conferences, well, there are teams jumping in and jumping out 3 decades later and back and forth and all over the place. So you played, if you're TCU, you played some of your history as who knows what in 1940. I'd have to go back and look, but as a member of the WAC, as a member of Conference USA, and then suddenly in the last 12 years, you're playing with the big boys in the Big 12. So is your winning percentage as valid as everybody else in the conference? No. Utah's only been playing Big boy football, been playing in the Power 5 since 2012. Is their winning percentage as valid? No. But what I've done with national championships that I think is more than reasonably fair, but it's not perfect, is I've not generally stripped away national championships to try to determine who should have been the national champion for that year, because there have been too many games that have not been played in certain seasons, especially pre-1998, that I have simply added to the national championships to say, okay, Alabama, quote unquote, won the national championship, but look at Team B, look at Team C, look at Team D. Their qualifications are extremely close, similar, the resume, da da da. I've gone, and so people may not like this because in America and anywhere where there's competition, we like to have one champion. And of course, I do as well. But we don't have a Super Bowl. We don't have a format that brings us to a reasonable championship, or at least didn't until 10 years ago to a certain extent. Therefore, I've got seasons where I've got 3 national champions, 4 national champions.
Yeah, and I think that the way you've done it is very, very smart, and it's probably the best we can do. And it just makes me wonder about alternatives to determining a true national champion in the future. I mean, what would you think if number 1 and number 2 played a best of 3 series for the national title?
I think that just, how do I put it? Emotionally or logistically just flies in the face of how we perceive and how we gear up for football.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of practical problems with it, but I think that, in my view, there's a large consensus about who number 1 and number 2 is. Number 3 is typically lower significantly between the first 2. So I think we're making a mistake by going to 12 teams. Instead, I think we should focus on who is number 1 and number 2. I think we'd get a large consensus. And then instead of basing it on one game or one PI call, have it be a best out of 3. And then I think there'll be more faith in that. But the reason I'm saying that is kind of try to rethink how we do this so that there could be more of a consensus in who the national champion is and less controversy.
So the best of 3, if we were playing video games, I understand that response, but in reality, it would just take so much away from, first of all, it would take so much away from the emotional anticipation of the national championship game if there were 3 of them. And then are you going to keep 2 teams at one site for 3 weeks to play every Saturday for 3 consecutive weeks? Is that what you're going to do?
I'm going to take the number 1 team and give them 2 home games, and the number 2 team gets 1. I'm going to make it like Major League Baseball or professional basketball. And I think, a game 3 would be equivalent to a game 7 in Major League Baseball, and that's exciting too.
Absolutely, it is. I don't know that these players would be in for that. And I just don't know if our culture and how we consume football would go in for that.
No, that's a fair point. But listen, Mark, thanks again for always a great discussion. Great show. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Adam.
All right.
Good to see you.
You too. Take care.
I tell you, Adam, I sometimes don't agree with him, but I have never said, well, that doesn't make any sense, or that wasn't well thought out, or it always leaves me thinking, okay, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I hadn't thought of that. Or maybe with some work, some tweaks, that could work. That would be revolutionary. Always enjoy the conversation with Adam. Brings a lot of great stuff to the table. And all I'm hoping for in part of these discussions and in mostly the comments that come into the channel is that people would at least understand the intent and the process. And so, for example, I arrived at a place where Ohio State's number 1 in this point system, Michigan's number 2, USC's number 3. If somebody wants to argue with me that Michigan is the number 1 program in this conference in the history of the conference, and even with USC's inclusion, I have no issue with that. I will argue it, but I have no issue with it. And understand that some people think I gamed this system. Well, that's okay. Mark, you took an oath to yourself. Okay. Not going to call people that or that. Okay. Yes. So I just determined a points system that I thought was fair. Then I applied it. If I was going to take this to an nth degree to try to fix it, I would certainly put a recency bias on this, which there is none. A 1900 national championship counts just as much as a 1975 national championship as a 2021 national championship. They all count the same. All the conference championships count the same. And that's including, understand this, that Ohio State's won 5 more outright conference championships than Michigan has. So we could make a list of outright conference championships, and that would be a different list. Because we've got Big Ten championships with 5 teams. Now that's rare. I can think of 2 occasions in which, I can think of at least 10 occasions when 3 teams shared the Big Ten championship. At least 3 occasions, or 10 occasions where 3 teams shared the Big Ten championship. Fortunately, we don't have that in conference play anymore. And who knows what's going to happen in conference championship games with this expanded playoff. I do believe that the Ohio State-Michigan series will never be the same again. Now, that doesn't mean that you emotionally and as a fan cannot hang on to this series and this rivalry, and it cannot be as intense and as meaningful to you. That's a personal decision. That is a personal feeling, a personal investment. But I'm talking about logistically, it will never be the same. Because if those 2 teams are playing for a playoff spot at the end of the year, they're not as good as we think they should be on a regular basis. Like if on a regular basis, Ohio State and Michigan are showing up at the Big Ten at their final game, 8-3 and 9-2, then they're not going to be as good as we think they are, or think that they should be, or have been. Ohio State for a long, long time, and Michigan for the last 3 years. And they will not be competing for national championships. So otherwise, either Ohio State and Michigan are going to be so good that they're going to already be in the playoffs, or they're going to be fighting for their lives and they'll probably get stomped in the first round or the second round of the playoffs. All right. Comments, questions. Don't see anything in the chat. I do appreciate everyone being here. The Voice of College Football will do a going once, going twice, going 3 times. There is a link in the chat if you would like to join me to talk Big Ten all-time rankings. Understand, tomorrow night, Friday night, we're getting together at 7 Eastern. Maybe we'll back that up to 6 Eastern. We're going to do them all. We're going to have lists from top to bottom. That means I got to do some work tonight. All the conference championships, all the winning percentage, all the major bowl wins, top to bottom, nationally. And we'll throw all the points together. And I really, at some point, want to vet out all these national championships, which I will not have time to do that this offseason, most likely. You know what? No, I'll make a declarative statement. I am not going to have enough time to run through that this offseason. Unfortunately, I would love to. But if you only knew the projects we have in store here at the Voice of College Football, you would understand. Our buddy Sean's checking in. Sean, what's going on today?
Not much, Mark. Happy to have a few down moments to catch this interesting discussion going on here. So, yeah, happy. Enjoyed watching your breakdowns here.
I appreciate it. Any particular take?
I mean, not much. Whenever you do something like this, like the answer, it's you have a formula. It's pretty predictable where everyone's going to lie in all this. Obviously, I mean, I think most reasonable people would say objective criteria, Ohio State's going to be number one, and Michigan and USC are going to be up there. And yeah, I'm kind of interested more in sort of the middle, how it shakes out.
Yep.
Because you've got programs like UCLA who have decent history but haven't been real great lately. Minnesota, which has like a really, really good distant past, but not much in a very long time.
Yep.
And then programs like Wisconsin and Iowa who have been quite strong over the past 20 to 30 years, but really not much of a history behind that. So there's kind of a mix in the middle. So it's kind of interesting.
Let me respond, Sean, if I may, to your first statement about the top of the rankings, and then we'll go to anything else you'd like to talk about.
Yes.
Because it's funny that you think it's pretty plain. I guarantee that we cannot find a Michigan fan who does not believe that they are the number one program in the history of the Big Ten, which I don't have an issue with. I do not have an issue with that opinion. There would be only one person that I know of that would say it's so close I can't even make a call. And do you know who that is?
Yourself?
No. I mean a Michigan fan who says it's so close that I can't make a call.
Who is that?
Steve Dace says, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. Could be Ohio State, could be Michigan. It's so close. I don't know. He has consistently told me that. He doesn't make any kind of big stand that Michigan's the greatest program in the history of the Big Ten. He, of course, then explains where he thinks both strengths are for each program historically. And, of course, it's well-informed. So that I find funny. And then we got our buddy Tim Prangley, who was in the chat yesterday, and he made his list of Alabama's number one and Ohio State. Oh, no, USC's number two and all time nationally. And then Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Michigan, you can just throw a blanket over them. They're tied for third. I'm doubting if any of those people have looked at as many numbers, and I don't want to say it in an arrogant way, know as much about what's happened, especially over the last 50 years. But that's what I've chosen to do, so I should.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing in actually developing a formula to determine these things and just sort of kind of adding your own intuition into the mix. For example, I don't know if anybody would make the serious claim that Minnesota has a better football program than Florida State. But I bet if you applied a certain reasonable criteria to it, you would get the result that Minnesota is a better program than Florida State.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's interesting when you weight everything equally across all generations. Like, you do get some interesting results like that.
So there's one obvious metric that I think Penn State gets ripped off on here. I don't know how to fix it, but I mentioned it when I got to it, is they couldn't win a conference championship until 1993.
Yeah.
So the only way I fixed it was I have a listing in here, a category that has percentage of conference championships in which you are a member of the conference.
But that all favors them quite a bit, because that takes away, some of the years before Joe got there, they didn't even have much of a
Sure, that's at least an objective measurement.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's problems with any way you're going to determine this. So, but that only being one factor of it is, sort of mitigates whatever disadvantage that poses to Penn State. I don't know. I mean, would you ever consider doing like something to sort of find a way to measure the current health of a program, come up with some formula that sort of weights recent results and recent recruiting classes, and I think that might be something that it might be a bit trickier to develop, a formula for something like that, but it might be a little bit more provocative.
Yeah, it's more about a trend and a trajectory than it is just cold, hard history. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, over the last few off seasons, I have listed my program rankings, the current program rankings, meaning not historically, where I think these programs are right this second.
Yes.
1 through 130, whatever the number was at the time. So I've done that. Now, I didn't have a point system. I just gave a lot of confirmation of records and where they're headed and their recruiting status and all of that. And I've made a ranking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that could create. I don't know if I'm really that familiar with that series. Something like that would be pretty interesting, pretty cool, and I think would provoke a lot of discussion. In the coming months.
We'll get on that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna separate it by at least maybe a month from this one, so people aren't confused.
Right.
About what we're doing. But yeah, I'll have to dig up last year's. And then, of course, just like my coaches' rankings, I'll put in parentheses, okay, this is where I had them ranked last year. And this is why they've jumped 5 spots or dropped 5 spots.
Absolutely. And I mean, going forward, it seems like the playoffs would complicate this a little bit more, because you're going to have, just say over the next 10 years, you're going to have, if you include playoff appearances or playoff record in the future, then that's going to weight a lot of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Towards a contemporary basis. I mean,
absolutely it is. Yeah, people are going to care where their team finished in the playoffs, not in the regular season. The regular season is going to be about getting to the playoff.
Yeah. And you say that interestingly. For most of the teams here, I mean, they're not going to make the playoffs, a 12-team playoff or even a 14-team playoff very often.
No.
So, I mean, like, that'll be interesting to see, like, what, for these mid-level programs, what constitutes a successful season going forward, because I'm sure, the Minnesotas, Michigan States, Maryland's, they'll want to get there, and I'm sure some of them will make the playoffs every once in a while, but is that going to be a reasonable metric on how to, is it just all going to be playoffs or bust now? I mean, I don't know how, in the bowl season, I imagine is going to be diminished significantly in value.
More.
Yeah.
The 3 that you brought up, who'd you bring up? Michigan State, Maryland, and somebody else?
Minnesota.
That's a great question for everyone right there. Is either Minnesota, Maryland, or Michigan State going to make a playoff in the next 10 years? Any of them?
Yeah.
I'd have to think about that, and I would not be sure on either answer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So now it's kind of interesting. You think about, you look at these AP rankings, bowl wins, like all these metrics were basically, I mean, the sport stayed so static for so long. I mean, it was just 1998 when Big Ten teams could actually play for a national championship.
Yes.
Game, right? I mean, so from 19 whatever. I mean, I know the conference started like in 1890 something, right? But like say, okay, but say from like the 1920s or whenever they get their Rose Bowl tie-ins started, up until 1998, so little changed, and so much has changed since then. And and the changes just more are just coming with such velocity now that doing
Yeah.
rankings like these in the future are going to be very, very difficult.
Well, we may have more valid information though to base them on.
Yeah, well, probably. I mean, yeah, but right now, I mean, like, yeah, you look at this and it's like this is just a very reasonable criteria for everything that's happened in college football up until this point, and it's fairly straightforward. Well, I didn't realize Ohio State and Michigan have the exact same winning percentage, or I mean, probably not the exact same, but
Yeah, it's
to
within.
the thousandth decimal point the same
Yes.
winning percentage. But that is yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, it is pretty much exactly right. So, they have the exact same total points in your system, in your criteria.
No, if you throw it all together, Ohio
Okay.
State's first.
First, okay. Yes. All right. What's that point? Is that that's for polling points.
Yeah, right here.
No, column C. Column C, right there.
Oh, I basically doubled the winning percentage
Oh, okay. All right.
and made that a foundation for the rest of it to a certain extent.
All right. Okay. All right. I get that. And just curious, so where did Michigan State land overall on this?
Well, let's see. If we're just looking at my point totals here, and they're out of order, but Michigan State is,
56. So they're,
I believe they're fifth. They're behind Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, Penn State, Michigan State.
and would they be ahead of? I'm sure they're behind USC, probably Washington too. I'm not.
They are
Almost
ahead of
ahead.
Washington by 7 points.
Okay.
Michigan State, like if you look at this last column all the way to the right, that's how many times a team has finished ranked and ranked in the top 10 and ranked in the top 5. And so they've finished ranked in the top 5 twice, 2 more times than Washington, and 3 more times in the top 10 and 1 more time in the top 25.
No, that's quite interesting. They've been kind of a feast or famine program for a lot of them. They've been either like they've actually had a lot of really good teams through their history, but a lot of like 5 and 6 and stuff like that.
And think about this: Washington is barely over 500 this century, and they just went to 2 college football playoffs in the last 6 or 7 years. They went to a Rose Bowl and a Fiesta Bowl in addition to those playoff seasons.
Yeah.
Michigan State's got a 14-game lead this century.
Yeah, well, Washington did have an 0-12 season, and that whole Willingham era was, I mean, puts a real black eye on a lot of those numbers. So, yeah, and yeah, they're an interesting one too, because they had a team that probably should have been playing for a national title game in 2000, and then they got to be really, really horrible. Got better, got really bad again, and then I mean, yeah, they've been a roller coaster program, maybe the model roller coaster, the Space Mountain program in college football. Yeah, they've had like a few top 5 teams, and they're still barely over 500 for the century.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the conversation, Mark.
Thanks, Sean.
I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right, let's keep it rolling. We've got Michigan fan Keith on the line. Keith, what's going on tonight?
Hey, Mark, doing great. Short time no talk.
I know it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be a little bit adversary today, though. Unfortunately, do you ever hear what a Texas bullseye is?
A Texas bullseye. I can't say that I have.
Okay.
That I know of.
All right. This is a Texas bullseye. Is a Texas rancher goes out and claims to be this great shot. So he goes out to shoot at his barn, and there's a big old knot in the barn. And so he starts shooting at that dot. And then when he goes to find out where most of a bullet hits, he goes over there, circles that, paints the bullseye right there. Okay?
Okay.
All right. It seems to me like you painted a Texas bullseye on this data.
I'm not following, but keep going.
Okay, I heard you talking a few weeks ago about the importance of first-round draft picks in the NFL for evaluating programs.
I would love for you to recant that conversation because
yeah, it wasn't with me. It was
I have never said that it was that important to like if there was a particular program that was competing for national championships every season and winning conference championships and all of that and never produced NFL draft picks, I could care less. I would say, this is really interesting. This needs to be investigated. We need to look into this. How are they possibly doing this? Obviously, they would be a complete aberration. But in terms of accomplishing in college football, I wouldn't care. Like I'm.
So then why do you have overall draft picks and first rounders as two as your fields?
Because I think it's a measurement of a program, and I took a fraction of points from those totals to put
Probably
into that point system.
Probably 152 out of the 52, correct?
152 out of the 52.
Yes. Yeah. So it had equal weight with all the others.
No, I'm not considering these to all be of all equal weight. A school's winning percentage is weighted. Oh my goodness. It's like 30 or 40 times more than these draft selections.
Okay. I guess I need and did you say in the other video you explain how all these numbers are arrived at and what weights they have?
I do. And I never claim that it's perfect. Right. Because that doesn't exist, first of all. So for anybody out there who thinks they're going to create some kind of perfect system, give me a ring. But yes, so we're talking about roughly okay, let me be accurate. Now that I'm looking at the numbers, we're looking at about 8 times for the lesser programs, it's even more than that. So we'll say roughly 10 times the weight given.
What do you mean for the lesser programs? It's more or less?
Well, it depends on what the number is. So I didn't go through and say winning percentage is worth 50 points and conference championships are worth 40 points and then do a scale.
Oh, okay.
So if you produced 0 draft picks, then obviously your win percentage is infinite number of times greater than your number of draft picks.
Okay. So are you saying the actual number of picks is equal to a number of points you get in that field?
No.
Okay, I thought you would have that a rank in the program strength, and then use something like that. Do you do that?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
If you sort by number of first round picks,
Yes.
and you come out number one on the list,
Yes.
then you should get the 15 points, and number two gets 14.
I don't believe in evaluating that way, and this is why. Because you could be number one in something by one data point. Michigan could have 1,000 wins and Ohio State could have 999, and you just have a set criteria that the number one ranking gets 20 points and the number two ranking gets 15 points. Or Michigan could have 1,000 wins and Ohio State could have 850 wins and they're still number two. So I believe in rewarding the total and not so much where you ranked. Some of these totals through here are so excruciatingly close in the middle that I'm not going to make a huge disparity in points given between, let's see, when we look at, let's look at NFL draft picks, when we've got schools at 323, 299, 276, 389, 360, like we've got 7 or 8 schools within like 50 draft picks. So
yeah, that's the nature of statistics, that bell curve thing. People kind of get in the middle of everything. Yeah.
yes. And I guess a better way to say that is if I had, and it almost applies to this conference, if I had 2 A students and I had 18 students, as we do here, and I had a bunch of C+ students, I'm not going to penalize after I scratch my head and go through excruciatingly painful numbers all night trying to grade these 2 top students. Am I going to dock the second student just because I've got them all slotted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? If the third student's not even close to the other 2, well, then I think that should be represented. I think that should be displayed.
Yeah. Because when you first started this project and you said greatest programs of all time, 3 names come to mind when most professional sports writers think of the 3 greatest teams of all time. And
Really? 3?
yes.
Okay.
And those are Michigan, Notre Dame, and Alabama.
Okay. Those sports writers probably don't know what the hell they're talking about.
I think actually they do. This has been going on for decades.
Well, that's the problem right there. It's been going on for decades and they haven't changed their opinion in decades. So that's a problem.
Yes. Ohio State's an elite program. Don't get me.
I would take exception, and I would be more than open to debating. I would be begging, pleading to debate somebody who wanted to come on here and tell me that there is no comparison between Notre Dame and Ohio State all time as 2 football programs. That person is basically a moron, and they've put their head in the sand for 30 years.
Notre Dame was good for a long time.
Obviously, they're good. We're mentioning them in the top 4 or 5 in the nation, but are you kidding me?
Yeah, I don't think I am kidding you. I'm being serious here. Before Woody Hayes, Notre Dame had a lot of wins.
Before Woody Hayes.
Yes, before Woody Hayes. Since Woody Hayes, Ohio State's been a powerhouse, right?
Yes, you just went 73 years in reverse.
Uh,
73 years.
yes, yes.
Are we
That's
really taking 73 years of college football history out of the equation?
I'm not taking it out of the equation. I'm saying that it's more than just the last 73 years.
Well, obviously, every number you see here, Keith, is an all-time number. I made no manipulation toward the present day. None. Zero. There is zero skewing of these numbers toward any recency bias. Zero.
Was the 70s, post 70s stuff, was that all?
That's just for discussion. It's just a list. It's not factored into those points at all.
Okay, and that's what I thought you were. I heard you say before. I think you said that you did the since 70, but you didn't include those in. Okay.
Now let me clarify something, Keith. If somebody wanted to come on here, whether they knew a lot or a little or whatever, and hopefully a lot, so that they could have a reasonable debate with me, and they wanted to debate that Notre Dame is a better all-time program than Ohio State, I think that's an absolute valid argument to have. I'm not saying it's not a valid argument. I'm telling you that it's a completely ridiculous position to say that Notre Dame's a better all-time program than Ohio State, and it's not a debate. That I will argue that person into a fetal position if they want to come on here and argue that Notre Dame, and it shouldn't even be a discussion, is a better program than Ohio State all time. That person will get completely steamrolled. Not by me yelling, but me laying out facts.
Yeah.
Number one, what is the most important thing is basically, to me, it's winning football games. And Notre Dame does not have a better all-time winning percentage than Ohio State. Number two, they can't even beat Ohio State when they play them. They've lost 6 straight games, and I understand that spans a lot of time, but it doesn't span that much time. They've played 6 times in the last 28 years, and it's 6-0.
Yeah, you know what, that's news to me. I didn't follow that stat. I've probably seen all 6 losses, but I just never put that together that you guys were on a 6-game winning streak against Notre Dame.
And again, to be fair, Keith, Clemson beat Ohio State 4 times in a row, and it happened over the span of 35 years or more.
Yeah.
Well, longer than that. So anyway, 40 plus years. So
right.
Those games were played. They're valid. They need to count, but it's not like you're playing somebody every year and you're beating their head in. You played them at random times 4 times, but now we're up to 6 times with Notre Dame.
And I'm not arguing. I'm saying that Ohio State over history is clearly a better program than Clemson is. Clemson had a rise in the 80s, and maybe sometimes before that, but they had a rise in the 80s, and then they had a rise just a few years ago. But the most of the time they're a rather like an 8-4 kind of team. Whereas Ohio State's been 11-1 forever.
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah. So the point I'm making is that they 75 years ago, Notre Dame got all the good Catholic boys that were going into college. And they dominated. They were just an impressive program. And you look at all-time wins, and you see Notre Dame right up there.
Yes, I'm not debating. I didn't laugh you into submission when you mentioned Notre Dame as being in the argument. It was when you excluded, and I won't even just include Ohio State. Of course, we're talking about the Big Ten today. But if you want to exclude Oklahoma from that conversation, I don't think that that's valid? Oh, or
In
USC?
history, is Oklahoma more dominant or Texas more dominant
Oklahoma.
through all of history?
Yes.
I remember early, like the Bo and Woody days.
Okay.
Texas was winning a lot of those games.
Okay. You want to see some numbers here?
Yeah.
Okay. Look at your screen if you can see that. All-time winning percentage, Oklahoma 725, Texas 702. AP poll points, Oklahoma has over 300 more. They've both won 31 major bowls. And when I say AP poll points, let me put that
you know what? I'm forgetting that for a long time Texas was in the Southwest Conference and Oklahoma was in the Big Eight.
Okay.
Correct?
Yes, they were up until 1996.
To 96. Okay, so I'm not thinking of the time that I'm thinking the time before. I thought Texas was a better program than Oklahoma, but they were in two different conferences. So
here are three last numbers for you when we look at rankings to put those AP poll points. To me, this makes more sense and it's more understandable. Oklahoma has finished ranked 62 times, Texas 51. Oklahoma has finished in the top 10 45 times, Texas 28. Oklahoma's finished in the top 5 33 times, Texas 22.
When Oklahoma was in the Big Eight, though, who was their main competition?
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Okay, that's a pretty good competition. Yeah. Okay. When Texas was in the Southwest, who was their main competition?
It kind of jumped around between Arkansas and SMU.
Yeah, it did jump around. So they actually had an easier time than Oklahoma, it looks like. Yeah, okay. So I'll give you that one. Yeah, that Oklahoma is more dominant, slightly more dominant over time, probably 5 or 10% more, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is if am I correct in saying that Michigan and in a majority of the fields is within 2% of Ohio State, including the total?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about every category?
Yes. Well, not each, but accumulated together.
Oh,
some together.
And I made this comment at the end of the video that I posted. This is just a point total. It's a point system. I would love to be able to enter all sorts of so the next two figures I would love to add to this would be strength of schedule, which for those two should be extremely close because obviously they're just playing a perfect reflection of each other against the other conference members, unless there was just some kind of random luck that one of them played a tougher schedule for a few years, or because it's just completely obviously on a rotational basis. And especially back in the day, they were playing 8 or 9 out of the other 8 or 9 teams in the Big Ten. But anyway, strength of schedule, because that would help the cross conference comparisons. And then number 2 would be their record in the conference, their conference records. I would like to see the conference winning percentage.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah,
I may even look that up right now. See if I can find it.
For a long time, that was heavily in favor of Michigan and Ohio State in the Big Ten because we were the Big Two and the Little Eight for a long time.
Yeah,
and when it comes to top 5 and top 10 rankings, for the last 10 years, it's been a lot easier for a Pac-10 team to get a top 5 ranking than it has than for a Big Ten to get a top 5 ranking.
What?
Yes, a Pac-10 could easily run through Your head's about to blow up, huh?
Yes, there have been more Big Ten teams finish in the top 5 in the country, namely Ohio State, and in the last 3 years, Michigan, than
But
Pac-12.
what I'm saying, it was easier for the Pac-10 to get a higher ranking at the end of the season. Like Washington last year was ranked number 3, right?
Yeah, I guess whatever they were. I
Yeah,
would
but
think number 2. They lost the national championship game. Whatever they were.
yeah,
You're
they
basically
finished
telling
number
me that
2.
that the Big Ten has been better than the Pac-12. That's basically what you're telling me.
Yes.
I have no argument of that. Certainly,
Yes, is that
I
and
completely
so
agree with you. I'm sorry, I misunderstood where you were going with that angle.
yeah, is that it's easier to finish higher in the rankings if you're playing against lesser competition all the time.
So let's understand that the Pac-12 has been strong the last 2 seasons.
Yes, it has. It's stronger, I would say.
Yes, but before that, it was a joke for a number of years.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And before that, USC dominated in a big way.
Well,
And they
after
got a
that,
lot of top
Stanford
5.
and Oregon dominated.
What's that?
And
Oh,
after
yeah, that's
that, it
right.
was Stanford and Oregon. For about
Yeah, it was Stanford, Oregon, and then in the 70s and 80s.
I'm talking about just 10 or 12 years ago.
Okay, yeah, 10 or 12 years ago, yeah. When was USC's reign? You know better than me.
Well, a number of them. The most recent was Pete Carroll, had a phenomenal 02 through 09.
Sure, and John Robinson.
Ridiculously good. Yes, John Robinson, of course, in
He
the
was
70s and early 80s. And then he came back and did pretty well, but not as good. But, and of course, his was right off of John McKay.
and John McKay, yeah, okay. So yeah, the Pac that was the Pac-8 back then, probably. I don't know when it became the Pac. 78 was the Pac-10.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So no, it was Pac-10 most of the time then, yeah. So yeah, the USC dominated for a while, but again, at that point, USC had it easy because there was almost nobody in the conference that could compete.
I don't agree with that.
No, you don't agree with that? It certainly wasn't anybody consistent. Each year they had a different guy that rose up.
Who was winning the Rose Bowl from about 1970 to about 1990?
Yeah, that was USC.
I'm talking about what conference was winning the Rose Bowl.
The Pac-10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of difficult to knock them after they were kicking the Big Ten in the teeth year after year after year.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that the teams like USC clearly deserved the number 1 through number 5 rankings the year they got it. They were a legitimate team that could toe to toe with anybody. But there are other times when Oregon and Washington in the last 12 years ran through a weak conference and had these inflated records because they didn't have anybody challenging them.
I think that starting at about 2014, 15, that the Pac-12 was awful for about 6 or 7 years. But
yes.
I'm not going to discount prior to about 14 or 15. I'd have to go back. Oregon and Stanford were extremely good teams coming off of Pete Carroll's reign. They took over.
Yes. And I see that this year in Oregon, I've said this before on the other shows when we were talking about +3, -3, your big +3, -3, which was a very, very interesting discussion. I loved every minute of it. And I came on, I was the only one to come on, I think, that night with a -3, and that's for Oregon. Because when Oregon's defense hits the Big Ten, they're gonna be in trouble.
Oregon 8-4.
I would actually have them right about that. Yes.
Okay.
Because, like I said that night, Oregon and Washington played two very close games. I mean, it was almost a coin flip who could win that game.
Yep.
Okay. And Michigan beat Washington by 21 points.
They did.
So I think it's fair to say now what is it? Transference where they go
transitive property.
Transitive, that's it. Sorry.
Okay.
I stumble a little bit. Using the transitive property, then Michigan would have beaten Oregon by 21 points.
I used the transitive property one time to show that Northern Arizona could beat Ohio State, an Ohio State team that won the Rose Bowl. So you got to be careful with the transitive property. Now, I do agree with you that if you use it in waves, meaning you have compilations of games and games and games, but just to use it like connect the dots one time.
Yeah.
But you're using very good teams, and so I have no issue with that. Michigan, I thought Washington was hanging in the game for 3 quarters, but Michigan was clearly the better team. Not close. They were clearly the more physically imposing, dominant team. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Michigan was like the old 70s and 80s USC teams where they beat you up for 3 quarters. In the 4th quarter, you were so tired and worn down, they had your will with you. Remember Anthony Munoz and that offensive line?
Sure.
As they just crushed the other team. Who I think Anthony Munoz was probably the best left tackle to ever play the game.
You are probably right.
Yeah.
I would not argue with that.
There's a lot of debate in there, and and that's just why I'm saying, in my opinion only, because it's hard to pick a Mount Rushmore of left tackles in college football. So yeah, but Michigan in the end steamrolled Washington so that in the 4th quarter we just crushed them. I'm saying that we would have probably done very likely the same thing to Oregon if Oregon would have won the Pac-10 championship, gone to the playoff, and beat Texas. Then we would be there too.
Okay.
We almost had a third guy, huh?
No, I guess I missed your last statement.
Okay. I'm saying that the same reasons we beat Washington, I think would be the same reasons we probably would have beaten Oregon.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I
Yeah.
got you. Yeah.
So I think Oregon and Washington benefited from a down Pac-10 last year. Caleb Williams and USC lost 4 of their last 5 games. Looks like they quit at the end of the season.
Okay, I don't know if they quit. I would say that last year's Pac-12 was better than it's been in a decade.
In the I agree that in the non-conference matchups at the beginning of the year, the Pac-10 looked like the strongest conference. But I don't judge a team by how it starts, a conference by how they start. I judge by how they finish.
Okay. Well, they finished with a pretty sorted, just like most conferences, when you put it all together, most times you look at the conference postseason numbers, everybody kind of deviates to the middle generally.
Sure.
So
The
the
bell curve we
Pac-12
were
pretty much
talking
went
about.
500 in the postseason.
Uh-huh.
Oregon won, USC won, Washington won, then they lost. Utah lost, Arizona won, Cal lost, Oregon State lost. Probably comes out to almost 500. Big Ten, the same thing.
Didn't the Pac-10 like win like 2 or 3 of their games in the non-conference schedule last year? I mean, they were pretty strong.
They were okay. I'm trying to think of who actually played and beat anyone decent.
They were all kind of nothing games. Yeah.
Yeah, they were. I can't think of anyone who beat anyone decent. Utah beat Florida and Baylor. Colorado beat Nebraska and TCU. Oregon beat Texas Tech. Were extremely fortunate to beat Texas Tech.
Right.
Washington State beat Wisconsin. That might be one of the better wins. Arizona, they lost to Mississippi State. USC lost to Notre Dame.
Yeah, but I seem to remember. I don't think it was 2 years ago. I'm almost sure it was this last year that everybody's raving about the Pac-10 looking like the strongest conference, and I just, like I said, they started out strong, but they sure didn't finish strong.
My opinion of the Pac-12 didn't change much from the time they played a couple games early through the rest of the season.
So you thought they were still one of the stronger conferences?
If we're just looking at data, then it's very difficult to distinguish the conferences last year. If you're just asking me who the best conferences were, I would say that the SEC was definitely the best conference, and that the Big Ten was the second best conference, but the Pac-12 was certainly close, and that the ACC and the Big 12 were in some order. I'd have to go back. Probably the Big 12 better than the ACC, and that's how I would rank them.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We'll just end it there. Although I'm going to get off this call by saying Andy Staples used science, and he said if the science is wrong, blame the science. But if it's right, then give me the credit. So, but he said he looked at one stat last year that he thought predicted the national championship. That was Ohio State, because Ohio State led in first round projected draft picks off the team last year at the beginning of the season and the off season, preseason. Okay, and so they were at 3 or 4 or 5 or something.
Yep.
And they were number 1. And guess who Andy Staples said is number 1 in projected draft picks this year? First round draft picks.
I would think it's Ohio State.
Actually, it's Michigan, but it's close.
Michigan. Okay.
Michigan is 3.75 and Ohio State is 3.
Well, you just pointed out that he's now, I don't know. I have no response to that statistic that he has. Number one, I don't know anything about Andy Staples. Number two, I don't know if he vetted that out for years and years and years and came to the conclusion, look at this pattern. This is an amazing pattern. So I'm going to throw this out there. That's what I would do. So I don't know what backing he had or confirmation to lead him to that conclusion. But it obviously was wrong last year.
It was actually more than a fun fact and a conclusion. I think he was saying it tongue in cheek with a big smile, and I don't think it was serious, but I just thought it was interesting. I thought you would get a kick out of Michigan being projected as a repeat national champion, and that's the way he put it. And and brought a smile to my face. You know, if we could all go off one statistic, I guess we wouldn't even need to play the games, right?
No, we wouldn't. A lot of people would like to do that, it seems, but I would rather watch the games.
No. Okay. All right. But
All right, Keith. Appreciate you
all
being
right.
here.
Okay. Always good to talk to you, Mark.
All right. Have a good night.
Okay.
So used to doing these shows at night. I've said night about 14 times at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but that's okay. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We got Christopher on the line. Chris, how you doing?
Good, Mark, and I don't want to waste your time because we've already talked about this, and I really enjoyed that last call. He kind of reinforced a few things, I guess, that I've been trying to share with you. And I just want to be clear, though, on something. I think you said that, and this isn't to pick on you, Mark. I don't know that there's ever been a case where you've been wrong. In all fairness, I mean, you may think I'm just being.
Of course, I'm wrong.
No, you're not.
Everybody's wrong
No,
at various times.
In my opinion, Mark, you're probably the smartest. I mean, I don't know how you get your information, but I don't know that I've ever found even a single instance where I mean, there was a time I thought you were, and I had to kind of eat some humble pie because I think after I looked into the investigation a little bit closer, I had to kind of, you get tired of talking. I don't blame you, to be honest with you, relative to 1984, but I'm not going to bring that up again because that doesn't really matter. But the one thing I was going to ask you, though, you said something about...
Just to understand before you continue, Chris, and I hate to interrupt, I'll just say I don't get tired of talking about 1984, except for two things. Number one, I got to think about my audience. And number two, just sometimes if we come to a place where we're not going to agree on something, there's no reason to continue if we're just going through the same pattern of debate.
I'm not trying to convince you that you're wrong because I don't think you are wrong. That's kind of the whole point. I don't know if maybe you didn't get that message or whatever, but I think you said you thought the national champion might have been Washington. And everything I've ever done to try to disprove that has failed. But in fairness, though, kind of to the question, it kind of goes along, and I don't like bringing this up again because people get sick of hearing about it, but I think there is evidence to support a championship for BYU, and it kind of hinges on the fact that it's going to be you might not make sense of it, but it kind of hinges on the fact that Pittsburgh tied Navy. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, but that kind of bolsters BYU up to the point where when they beat Pittsburgh, it's almost like they played in a championship game. But I'm just going to leave it at that because that's what I think. If people really want to get nitpicky about it, they should look at that game, and then if they want to find out a reason that BYU shouldn't have been a championship, they should base it on that game. And that's all I want to say about it, because I think I agree that people don't want to keep talking about a season that's 30 or 40 years ago, but that's what it boils down to, in my opinion, is that win. I mean, if they didn't win that game, they're not a national champion. That's what it boils down to. And it doesn't necessarily not make Washington a titleist either. So, I mean,
well, if I'm not mistaken, had they not won any one specific game that year, they would not be the national champion. Meaning if they had lost any game, they would not be the national champion.
Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to tell you, but maybe I'm not saying it very clearly. Yeah, no, that's 100% true. And that's what it kind of boils down to, because there's a dispute about that game, because I tried to explain this to people, but about less than a minute before, I mean, it was right before halftime, and I really don't understand what happened at that. It's kind of like, it's almost like it should be brought up as like kind of like the fifth down for Colorado. It really should, because Pittsburgh scored a touchdown, but they weren't credited with one. And I think they did a retrospective on BYU about, I don't know how long ago it was. It had the main players from that season. I don't know if you know who those guys would have been, but like Robbie Bosco, Blaine Fowler, I think was one of them. There's several players anyway, and Lavelle Edwards, obviously. And they brought it up to BYU's credit, I would think. I mean, you would think maybe on a retrospective, you wouldn't bring up a play where, that's the only reason I knew about it, because I just assumed that they'd won that game, relatively easily. But really what it was Pittsburgh elected to go for it on fourth down, because I don't remember I think it would have put them ahead, maybe. I'm not really sure, and it looked like it was one of those things. It would have taken a review to overturn it, I guess, but kind of like kind of like that play that Michigan had against Texas Christian, where it looked like they scored a touchdown, then it kind of looked like maybe they didn't, and then they.
Yep.
It's kind of like that. It was one of those things where it's like, did he not, did he? But I think if they had actually used a replay, which I'm not sure why they didn't, I think they actually probably, and even Blaine Fowler said, well, that should have been a touchdown. So it looks like we got away with one there or whatever. But I don't know how that impacts the result. I mean, it would have made it a tie game instead of a win. The way I kind of look at it is like, well, they got away with the win. So I actually kind of factored that into my rankings. And just so you understand, and it's not to like give preference to one result, but even with the win, in an overtime, all that really does, that just makes it harder for BYU to claim a title. It doesn't, in fact, what it kind of does, it actually makes it to where they can't win. But, I'm not trying to change history. I don't feel like that's my job. The only thing I want to say about it though, I kind of think if the New York Times, if they were, I don't know, I don't want to like make it about them either, because they picked Florida. And there is a basis for it, but it kind of requires that we kind of ignore certain things. Actually, I mean, it kind of requires that we ignore BYU being 13-0. So it's kind of a weird thing what they did, but there is some justification to what New York Times did. But probably what they should have done, though, in my opinion, is they probably should have given that to Washington. And I don't really understand why they didn't. But and it's their title to do what they want to, I guess. But if they wanted it to agree with what I do, which I'm not saying they should, but if they did, that's probably what they should have done. But it does make sense that they gave it to Florida, as long as we're including Louisiana State, because those two teams tied. They were like, it's kind of like, I don't know what you call it. It's like, there's a few examples like that. I think one might be the 1996 Florida. I think even you might agree with that. The 1996 title it's like we gave it to Florida, but how do you really give it to one team if they both kind of share a title sort of thing? Or another one might be like, I guess, the title between LSU and Alabama. It's like, what year was that? I don't remember. 1-1 in the regular season, 1-1 in the postseason. I mean, and then there was another one. I mean, there was the one I think in 2000. Was it 2001? That's what I have a problem with that too. It's like, okay, well, one team won at the end of the year. Okay, well, why does that really matter? I mean, it's not. This isn't the NFL, and I don't know. I guess I just kind of wonder, Mark. I don't know if you agree with me on any of this stuff, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but I don't know that winning the last game necessarily makes the team the best team. I mean, it might. In most circumstances, it probably does, in all fairness, but that's what I don't like about the new format, I guess, is it's like, okay, it's the team that wins at the very end that's the best team. And I'm not sure that's always true. I mean, it probably mostly probably is, in all fairness. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. It does work. And then there was one other thing I think you were asking me about, and I'm just going to share this with you again. And you don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. But what I noticed, it's kind of like it's relative to what BYU did in a way. I mean, they didn't play Washington. I understand that, but they did the following season and they won fairly easily. And I know that's the next year, no really connection between the two, but there was a common opponent though that they both played. It was UCLA. And what I discovered was that in most circumstances, probably not in every circumstances, but in most circumstances, the winner of that game is usually overturns the result of the previous year. I mean, that might sound like the weirdest way to try to determine a titleist, but when UCLA beat BYU, that's like saying that BYU may have been the best team in 1984, but it's still conjecture. But, I noticed that for almost every season. In 1983, I think it was Auburn, and they lost to Miami, Florida in 84. And then I could go through like almost the CFP era, almost every belt championship, which I know you don't like that term, but almost everyone has overturned what I think would have been the BCS titleist. So it's like, I think what it does, it might give us a one team at the top, but it's not necessarily always the best team. And that's the biggest issue I have with it. I think it works. I really do. I think it works. It does what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in every circumstance that the team that wins at the very end is always the best team. And that's what I don't like about it. But you don't have to share my opinion. It's just something I kind of am aware of. And I think there's a lot of some evidence to support that, by the way. And then there was one other thing, if you don't mind. You said the transitive property put Northern Arizona above Ohio State. I don't know if it did or not, but that's based on circumstantial evidence, right, Mark? That's not like, that Northern Arizona would have beaten Ohio State. I think that's kind of not, you're almost saying the opposite, right? That probably wouldn't happen, right?
Yes, I was just pointing out that you can do a lot of things with the transitive property. And in 2021, that's my best example of showing that, because Oregon defeated Ohio State,
yeah, but
Arizona defeated Oregon, and Northern Arizona defeated Arizona.
Wasn't there a goofy game there where one team won in overtime? Like, I think it was like Stanford involved with one of them. I mean, it works, but it kind of doesn't, Mark, because, wasn't there? Am I wrong?
Yes, Stanford.
Okay, well, I guess the point I'm making with that one is it's not as clear as you're trying to make it like, okay, well, that shows that Northern Arizona would have beaten Ohio State. And it's
No. I'm exactly trying to make the point the exact opposite, that you can do all sorts of things with connecting game results.
Well, no, but I guess the point I'm trying to make, Mark, is I really kind of think the transitive property does work. And I tried to give you an example where I thought it did. It's the 1984 season, because Pittsburgh tied Navy. I know that's like the worst example maybe of the transitive property, but if Pittsburgh tied Navy and if BYU tied Pittsburgh, then it kind of puts them on the same level. Is kind of what it does. And then
Why is Navy involved in that comparison?
they beat South Carolina.
Okay, what's South Carolina have to do with it?
Well, it makes if you got to put kind of your bias aside, Mark. Not that you're biased, but
Putting any, yes, I have a huge bias toward Navy.
I kind of wonder, Mark, because I don't want to be mean to you, but I want to be fair though. I noticed the last time I talked to you, as soon as I brought up BYU, it's like, okay, call's over. This is the Big Ten show or whatever it was. It's like
well, it was, and
Oh.
actually this is as well, and we need to get going because unfortunately I've got a 5 o'clock appointment that I'm late for. But
No.
finish up your point here.
If I can, if you let me. I guess it was 2 seasons ago. Texas Christian would have been a national champion if Ohio State would have made a 50-yard field goal by the transitive property. That's just a fact. But I know you don't like the transitive property, but that's still if Ohio State. It's kind of interesting though. If Ohio State had made that field goal, then without a playoff, obviously, that would have put Texas Christian at the very top because of the way the transitive property works. So it's kind of something to consider. And the other thing about that was, if they'd have made it, then why don't all 4 teams advance? That's the other thing I don't understand. Why would it have just been Ohio State? It's not really, doesn't make sense. I mean, there would have been 4 teams in the chase. You advance all 4, right? You don't advance 2 of the 4. That's why that's kind of weird. The whole idea of having a 4-team playoff or a 2-team playoff or whatever isn't the best, because unless you have to advance all 4, that's why it's weird. And then the other thing that was kind of weird, there didn't need to be another game after that. Georgia beat Ohio State. Why do they have to play another game? I think that determined who the national championship was, that game between Ohio State and Georgia. I don't know that we needed another game to really prove it. Well, I don't.
Chris, it's already a predetermined system.
Well,
you're not going to cancel the national championship game.
Well, no, but it's a pointless game. It's kind of, I guess that's what I'm trying to tell you. And I think it's been
pointless. It was for the national championship.
No, I think every season we've had CFP, I think it's been a pointless game that doesn't really matter, in my opinion. It doesn't every year, and that's kind of the point I'm making. Give me a year where it really mattered, made the whole thing different, and merely gave us the right result. I don't think you can.
2019.
I don't think it did. You mean the one that's LSU? The
LSU
title?
And Clemson were undefeated. They didn't need to play each other.
I don't think that game really mattered. I think we already kind of knew who the best team was, but that's just my opinion. You don't have to share it. No, I don't think we needed it, and I don't think it really worked. That's just my opinion, Mark. I don't know. And the reason I don't think it works is I think Clemson was the better team. I think if they'd have played, you're going to think I'm stupid, but I think if they'd have played that game in the Fiesta Bowl, LSU and LSU and Clemson, I'm not so sure that Clemson wouldn't have beaten them. I think the national championship game was between Clemson and Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl. I really do. I think the better team was, Clemson, and they had to play LSU. That's hard for anybody to play 2 national championship games. It's like playing 2 of them. How many teams do you think are going to win 2 national championship games? That's what made LSU the national champion. They only had to play in 1 of them.
I'm just going to hit you with one more example, and then I need to run, and you can make your closing comment. 2018, Clemson, Alabama. They're undefeated. They don't need to play.
Same thing. That's the one isn't that the one where Clemson really ran all over them? Yeah, yes. I don't think that really. I think you could have played that game a week earlier, and I don't know whenever it would have been.
You couldn't have played it a week earlier because they just were playing other teams.
Well, you're making justification based on what you think that the result should be, and I'm just telling you that it doesn't always.
No, I am making justification based on what the results were. You're making some kind of justification on not playing games and figuring out who the national champion is based on not playing football.
No, that's not true at all. I told you if Ohio State had made that field goal, the transitive rule, whatever you want to call it, I don't even know what you call it. It would have it would have made Texas Christian a national champion. Why does Texas Christian have to play 2 national championship games? Why does anybody? It doesn't make sense to me. They already beat Michigan. Oh, Michigan wasn't prepared to win or something? I know they got routed by Georgia. I don't know that it really matters. I mean,
so you're telling me if Ohio State would have beaten Georgia, they shouldn't have had a national championship game and just given TCU the national championship?
No, you don't. You must not listen to me. I said a playoff would have advanced all 4 of them. A real playoff that really matters, that really takes everything into consideration, would advance 4 teams, not 2.
Advance them to what? Advance them to just go ahead and play again?
Well, there's 4 teams that had the same record. I don't know. What else would you have done? Yeah, 4 teams that advance. They don't necessarily have to play the same teams.
That's why they're playing a tournament.
Mark, it doesn't. You're not. I don't think what you say really makes a. You can give whatever argument you want and tell me how wrong I am. Just because what? Because Georgia beat them 65-7. Okay, well that really proves. It didn't really prove anything. It proves that Texas Christian can't win 2 national championships. But I don't know that anybody really can. That's kind of my point. They should have to play in 2 national championship games. That's kind of the point I'm making. Why should they have to play in 2 of them? I don't know that anybody should have to do that, and that's why I think it's so hard to do. That's why BYU lost to UCLA. They'd already played in nationals. Well, maybe they didn't, but they hadn't played anybody but when they played UCLA, they played a good team, and they probably should have won that game. You ought to watch that game sometime just to see if you don't think BYU was any good. You kind of tell me they weren't any good. If they weren't any good, how can they play the team that won the belt? That's the best team in the championship game, is the team that won the belt.
Chris,
You
thank
don't
you
like
for
that
your
idea.
call. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank
Okay, sometimes it gets to a level of lunacy that you don't even have a response because there's no reason, because you would be here for hours. Even if he said nothing else, I would have to unravel that into some kind of sensical determination, conclusion. All right, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. I'm off to record some Penn State content. One item is going to be this James Franklin situation with the medical diagnosis and his forcing of players to play in games and imposing his influence on the decisions. So we will get that posted very soon. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you on Friday night with the national rankings when we throw it all together